Welcome back, everyone, to Screenfish Radio. I'm so glad you could join us as we kick off 2022 with our first episode of the new year. And I cannot be more excited about this episode. They said it couldn't be done. The band is back together. Not the Beatles.
Not the three Spider-Men.
Not the three Spider-Men. Almost as powerful. The OG hosts of Seeing and Believing here as well. Obviously, current host Kevin McLenithan and Wade Bearden. I'm so glad you could join me, guys. Thanks so much.
Yeah, this has been good. I'm so excited.
Really great to be back on the show. And I have to say, Steve, I'm really happy about you comparing us to the Beatles. I think that is commensurate with Wade's and my skill and stature in the area of podcasting. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I'm Paul and Kevin's Ringo.
Oh yeah. No, I appreciate you. Yeah, at least I'm not George Harrison.
Well, I considered comparing you to Oasis, but I decided to go the Beatles route.
Ooh, yeah, that stings.
Which one gets to be Noel? Come on, no. No, guys, I honestly, this is gonna be a lot of fun. I'm glad you could both join me, and I'm really excited about this episode. This week we're talking about The Power of the Dog. Power of the Dog is available on Netflix and tells the story of a domineering rancher named Phil Burbank, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, as he responds with mocking cruelty when his brother brings home a new wife and her son, until the unexpected comes to pass. The film stars Benedict Cumberbatch, as I said, also Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, and Cody Smith McPhee. As always, this podcast is rated S for spoilers. But gentlemen, I would love to hear what you think of The Power of the Dog.
Wade, do you want to go first on this one, or?
Yeah. So I think The Power of the Dog is fine. I'm kind of in this weird position where I enjoy reading people who are reviewing the film, talking about the film, hearing people talk about the film, more than I actually enjoyed watching it. Like I liked watching it, but I read articles and I'll read reviews or listen to reviews, and I'm like, wow, they found so much meaning in this movie. And it felt kind of lost to me. I felt like the storytelling was a little bit thin at times. Gorgeous to look at, and the performances are really wonderful. But I definitely feel in the minority here is that I thought it was good, but I just didn't really ever catch that sort of deeper resonance that I'm seeing with other individuals.
It's funny you mentioned that, Wade, because that's almost exactly how I felt about Licorice Pizza. Like I love reading people's thoughts on it way more than I probably loved watching the movie itself. That's not the way I felt about The Power of the Dog. I liked this movie quite a bit, and had it on my top 10 of the year. And I think part of the reason for that is I really jibed with its literary sensibilities. So I went into this movie cold. I didn't really know anything about it, and that's kind of how I like to watch a lot of movies, just like try to avoid as much information about it as possible, just so I can have as fresh of an experience as I could. And as I was watching The Power of the Dog, I was thinking, man, this feels like reading a great novel where the characters are so interesting, so multi-layered and complex, and it feels like there's always something under the surface to surprise me as the movie proceeds. And then when the movie ended and I saw that it was actually not an original screenplay as I assumed, but it was adapted from a novel by the same title, I was like, well, that makes sense. Like Campion's adaptation of the novel is just, the screenplay is just so, it's got these literary sensibilities. It just feels so layered and complex. And her directing and the performances really draw that out as well. This isn't the sort of movie, for me at least, where it was obvious whose side I should be on. Like, it starts off as a really straightforward melodrama in its first half, and then in its second half, things begin to develop in the story that really make you question your assumptions pretty much about all of the characters. And I don't know, I just love having that experience with the movie where it surprises me like that.
Yeah, I fall somewhere in between with you guys on this one, actually, because this is one of those films that I thought was stunning. I thought the performances were great. I thought the script was well done, and it still sort of felt disconnected from it. Like, it's very interesting. I've watched it now twice, and by the end, I feel like I've seen something beautiful and incredible, but I still sort of feel like I'm on the outside. So it's interesting. I still am not entirely sure where I land. I agree with you fully, Kevin. I feel like in some ways it's two movies. It almost there's such a tonal shift about halfway through, where it feels sort of like a more traditional cowboy movie in the first half, about the gruff and tumble, and it's really fun to see Cumberbatch be the gruff and gritty, a sort of against type character form. But they really flesh out his character in a way that surprises in the second half, and it really is a fascinating watch in so many ways.
Well, yeah, I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, I like Cumberbatch's Phil, and I think he is layered, and I think there's complexity there. I would say, though, with some of these other individuals, there's a difference between being layered and complex and just being unpredictable. Like, someone can be unpredictable, but not necessarily complex. And I felt that way about Peter's character. I felt that way about Rose's character, that in some ways they were unpredictable, but they weren't as layered as I wanted them to be. So one of my biggest beefs with the film, we're talking about livestock, I guess, in the movie. One of my biggest beefs with the film is Kirsten Dunst's character, Rose. She is fascinating, right? So she is living in a rough Montana town. She's running a boarding house. She's basically, she's surviving on her own with her son. And there are rough individuals coming in and out of her place of residence. Her husband was a doctor. He, quote unquote, right, committed suicide. And he was a drunk before that. She's like, I hate alcohol. I've seen what it's done. She's surviving on her own. She finds Jesse Plemons' character, George. And they're just, it's very rich. She talks about not being alone anymore. And then you've got Phil's character, who is terrible to her, but very quickly she becomes this woman who's very self-sufficient, someone who has persevered through these just incredible atrocities, and now she's just an alcoholic. Like, and that's the film, and she becomes this plot point. That's really it. Her character development stops. And so I guess that's what I mean by unpredictable and layered. And I felt the same way with Peter too, by the end of the movie, where he's just, I mean, he's just a serial killer, right? Like he goes from being someone who's troubled to being like, no, he's already killed. He killed again, and he's probably going to kill for a third time. And to me, that kind of betrayed the greatness and the layeredness of Phil's character, who just has a lot to him. And those are some of my biggest problems with the movie. But I'd like to hear you talk about it, Kevin, because you're a huge fan of the film, and a lot of people are. Most people are, it feels like.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about your experience with the characters, because for me, it's your description of the way they change over the course of the film isn't wrong exactly, but for me, it didn't seem so much like their character development stopped or took a left turn so much as there were things that were revealed about them that had been present all along, but had been concealed somehow. So, for example, Kirsten Dunst's character, you kind of see her at the beginning as you know, a single mother on the frontier at a time when, you know, single mothers weren't, you know, where single mothers weren't all that common, where being a widow was extremely tough. And so in the audience's mind, we have kind of this picture of her as she is the self-sufficient woman. She's the one taking care of her son. She's the one kind of comforting him when he is bullied by others for having interests and even a personality that is not stereotypically masculine in terms of the American frontier. And then as the movie progresses and she falls into alcoholism and the pressure of being this new wife and being bullied by Phil constantly takes its toll, I think that that's less of an example of her character kind of diminishing and more just it being revealed to us that she wasn't really as strong as we had maybe assumed from what we saw of her previously. And I think that holds true for Peter as well, where we kind of think of him as, you know, the sensitive soul who, you know, his voice is the first voice we hear in the film talking about how, you know, a boy has to look out for his mother. We first see him, he's making paper flowers. And so in our mind's eye, we're thinking, okay, he's this delicate soul who's not made for the frontier, but he's got a rich inner life, and your sympathies are primed to be on his side, so that when you find out that sensitive soul, where his shyness isn't because he's a sensitive soul, but because he's very cold, it recontextualizes our relationship to him, I guess. And I found that very interesting, where the second half of the movie causes you to question some of the assumptions that you'd built up at the beginning of the film, just based on the fact that you thought you were watching one kind of movie, but you're actually watching a completely different kind of movie. I found that very interesting.
What did you guys think of the post-credit scene?
Was there a post-credit scene? I
did
not know there was.
You haven't seen this part? They bang out a sign and put it right above the building, and it says Bates Motel.
Yeah, right. Well,
it's an origin story.
It's funny you say that, because if you look at Alfred Hitchcock's films, I mean, there's always this relationship with the mom. It's the mother and the son, and that takes especially like this very creepy turn in Psycho, but it's present throughout a lot of his movies, and you kind of get that here. And I didn't like the narration at the beginning because he's like, I'll do anything to take care of mama, right? And I was just like, okay, well, like, who's gonna die? I think with the film, he begins to dissect these creatures and act with such sort of almost malice, and that's sort of intriguing. But I think maybe a better story is to see what the toxic masculinity of Cumberbatch's character does to Peter. Instead of it changing and affecting Peter's like, no, like, really, like, I've been a killer the entire time. In terms of a very like pulpy twist, like that's kind of interesting. I just felt like it betrayed some of the layers that were there previously before. And with Kirsten Dunst's character, like, she is very strong and she is very capable. And I just wanted to see more of that, because once she kind of becomes an alcoholic pretty quickly. And then she's just kind of, I wouldn't say she's done with the film, but she's just the typical like alcoholic mom. And we don't see too much. And I just liked her character a lot. I liked her scenes with Clemens at the beginning of the film too.
It's interesting. I would say, just structurally, I think the film identifies the passage of time better in the first half than the second half, which is why you may feel like she becomes an alcoholic so quickly. I can understand that, but I do think this is happening over time, and this is getting worse. This is not an overnight, whoops, now I drink too much. You know what is interesting? I would love to know what you both think about the idea of the image. We're sort of dancing around that topic here, because I think that's so prevalent in this film. Every character, to me, feels like they're setting up a false image of themselves. And whether it's toxic masculinity or simply trying to be the perfect mother. I don't know. I would love to hear what you think.
Well, I think what I really like about this picture is that it is sort of, in a lot of ways, it is a study of masculinity in general, and how the different characters' assumptions of what makes a real man or what is truly masculine, how that drives them, and how that can sometimes lead them down some pretty dark paths. So, for example, Cumberbatch's character, we see him, and he's very much like the man's man. I'm going to bully everybody. I can't give somebody a compliment. If I do give my brother a compliment, I have to sort of couch it in sort of a, slap on the back, like, oh, you're so fat, but you're my brother. Like it's a very specific sort of the stoic, the rough around the edges man of the frontier that he's really playing into. And with the mid-film reveal that he is actually gay and feels a lot of angst over that, and is trying to either hide it from others or hide it from himself, or both, that becomes much, you begin to see that not as him being the man's man, but him essentially playing a part, him trying to become something through sheer force of will, and not even really being able to understand it fully himself. And you see George he wants to be the doting husband because he thinks that's what a real man is, but that creates some unintended pressures on his wife that he doesn't quite understand. Kirsten Dunst kind of sees George as a savior of sorts, like he's going to be the father to my son, he's going to be a husband, he's going to take care of us, we're going to be happy. And then when she gets to his home and realizes that it's not at all what she expected, she kind of falls apart. And every single character kind of has that, where they all kind of think this is what it means to be masculine, this is what it should be. And when they are forced to confront the shortcomings of those assumptions, I think that's where the friction comes in. I think that's what makes for a lot of the interesting tensions among the characters, and just the tensions in the storytelling in general.
And I think, in the thing you say, like the image, I think the cinematography, the imagery of the film does the best job of kind of conveying what Kevin's talking about. So Ari Wegner is the cinematographer here, and there are some shots that beautifully sort of illustrate the idea of the Western cowboy, the myth, the legend. There's one in particular that echoes a shot from The Searchers, and you have Phil kind of standing almost silhouette. Camera's inside this house and shooting out of the door, just like that famous shot at the end of The Searchers. And there's something about the rugged frontier and this individual being masked by it that just, I think, says so much. There's another scene in the film, a really great scene, where Kirsten Dunst's character and Jesse Plemons' character, they're coming home for the first time, and they stop and they have kind of this picnic, and George, he just kind of walks away, and he's fighting back tears, and we see this sort of I don't know, this inner emotion fighting against a perception of who he thinks he should be. And all this is kind of backdropped in front of these, it's supposed to be Montana, it's New Zealand, but these very rugged, wild mountains. And those images say so much. And I just loved visually this film. I like some of those things more than say like the dinner scene. And we kind of know what the dinner scene is about. You've got these rich individuals who are coming, and it's this juxtaposition between the idea of a rugged man and the city man. And we kind of know what's going to happen. Benedict Cumberbatch is going to go in and kind of mess things up. So scenes like that were fine. But the imagery is really where this movie does its best work. And I think some of the twists and some of the turns almost distract from that, I feel like, in my opinion. But man, it's just visually just the way, and I want to see this movie again. I wish I would have seen it in theaters. I saw it on Netflix, but it really is, it's shot spectacularly.
So Sarah Welch Larson, who's joined me on Seeing Believing now as the new long-term co-host, had a really great turn of phrase when talking about the cinematography here, where she talked about how the way that Campion and Ari Wegner shoot this landscape, they really emphasize like the obviously the ruggedness, but also just the sky. And Sarah talked about how it's the sort of sky where you're just sort of laid open underneath it. And I think that that's really a wonderful way of looking at this film, is how all of the characters, they're all kind of trying to avoid confronting something about themselves, or they're hiding something intentionally from others. But one way or another, their true self will come out. And we see that develop over the course of the film. And really, that's, in a weird way, it's like the Montana wilderness draws that out. Like you can't hide who you are for very long when it's just you in the landscape. Eventually, you're going to have to come to terms with what's inside. And I think each of the characters here, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, Benedict Cumberbatch, Cody Smith-McPhee, all four of them have darker parts of themselves or weaker parts of themselves that they don't want to admit are there, and yet they're going to come out, and they do come out. And I thought that was just a fascinating way for the cinematography and the landscape to draw that out of the script.
I love that connection, because I mean that was one of the things I truly loved about the film, is seeing these characters sort of their images, for me, the image unravel, just throughout in a variety of different ways. Cumberbatch may be the central piece, but like we've already said, each character here is trying to keep up with an image and trying to figure out, trying to put on a show for others. Whether it's Plemons, again, taking his own ideas of what it means to be the man of the house, or Cumberbatch trying to hide his homosexuality, hide his sexuality from the other cowboys, if you will, who are, your typical. They're all. I will say the other cowboys are almost like to the level of like Biff Tannen's like cronies in in like the Back to the Future movies. They're just jerks. Like there's nothing to them other than just being jerks. And oddly, I almost feel like Peter's character is the one who is most self-assured. I feel like although he seems to have a bit of an image, I just feel like people aren't looking. But I feel like he's not really hiding much. People are just so wrapped up in their own imagery and trying to put on their own show that they've projected on him what he is and how he fits into the landscape.
Well, it's interesting though, because he is sort of the person who kind of knows who he is the most. Like he knows that he wants to pursue medicine. He knows that he wants to protect his mother. He knows that he doesn't like the people who are making her feel bad. And yet he's weirdly self-deluded. Like he thinks that he's the hero of his own story. He's the one who's helping his mom. He's the one who sees himself almost like a god. There's that shot where he sees the verse in the Bible where it says, save me from the power of, save me from the power of the dog. And that's essentially a prayer to God. I don't know my King James that well, but it's definitely, it's a verse that has messianic overtones for Peter. Peter sort of sees himself as, I'm the one who's going to save my mom from all the bad men. And that in a weird way, it's its own self-delusion. It's not because it's not born out of insecurity the way the other characters are. It's born out of maybe too much security. He's too confident in who he is, and that gets curdled in different ways.
Well, and I'm trying to think, doesn't Jesus also quotes Psalm 22, a different verse on the cross, right? I think, but it is that it's a great point, Kevin. And I think too, what this movie does touch at that I appreciate is, I guess maybe the origin of evil, or the origin of this toxic masculinity, because when we first meet Benedict Cumberbatch, we're like, okay, this guy was born this way. And then you learn later that he went to Yale. And then you learn that he had this past relationship. And there's also this cloudiness. Like, was it abuse? Like, was he underage at the time? And is kind of all of this what has compelled him to overcompensate? And then you've got Peter's character, who at first it seems like he's being sort of like pushed towards evil by Benedict Cumberbatch, but then you find out, well, he probably like killed his dad and made it a suicide. So it was just, was he born evil? And so there's kind of all these questions like, where does this come from, and how is this perpetuated and kind of passed down in this climate and in this world? And I think those all raise like these very interesting questions. Like I said, about evil, but also about toxic masculinity and the idea of this mythical man or this mythical Western man.
Well, and going back to Psalm 22 for a minute there, it's interesting because, Kevin, I hadn't thought of that from the way that he perceives it, but because the verse itself is much more of a cry for help. So I always thought of it from the perspective of Cumberbatch, of Phil, because the verses are, "But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dogs. Rescue me from the mouth of the lion. Save me from the horns of the wild oxen." And I've always, when I read that, my first thought was, so much of Phil's experience has been crying out to be known, like to see the dog in the mountain. And he's shocked that Phil is shocked that Peter can see the dog, because, nobody else has the depth of soul to see the dog amongst the mountains. There is absolutely no connection there here. And his is a character who is scared to be known, but desperate to be known at the same time. So when I read the verse, after I saw the film, that was my first thought, was this speaks so well to the anguish that we see in Phil's character. But you've just given an entirely different twist that I think is fascinating, because yes, like Peter, like everybody in this film could potentially read this in an entirely different way.
Well, there's a perverseness, I think, to the way Phil carries himself. And what I mean by that is that he deliberately chooses to do things that are antisocial. He deliberately chooses to make himself as off-putting as possible to people so that they want to distance themselves from him. It's inherently self-defeating, which is what I mean by perverse. And there's a scene, it's that dinner scene, Wade, that you were talking about earlier, where George asks Phil, we're going to have a nice dinner. Some important people are coming. So can you just please bathe before you come in? And that offends him. And Phil just kind of snaps back. I like to stink, or something like that. He says, I like my stink. And I think that is a really revealing moment, because it suggests just a mingled sort of self-hatred. Like Phil he's a Yale man. He doesn't have to smell. He doesn't have to be antisocial. He chooses to be that way. Is it because he's just kind of a depraved person, and that's just sort of like, he just likes to be off-putting? Or is it spurred by maybe a sense of self-hatred? Like there are things that he doesn't like about himself, or things that he wishes were different about himself, or things about himself that he wishes that he could live openly, but he can't. And so he's just going to choose to sort of make himself as repulsive to others as possible. I think that the tension there is really interesting, and it's not entirely, it's ambiguous, I guess. And I like how the film leaves it ambiguous, whether, he's, this streak in his nature is because he's just a jerk and that's just the way he is, or is there something deeper going on? Is it because he wants to be known and nobody does know him, so he's just going to sort of lean into that? I think that's a really interesting dynamic.
And the fact that he except for when he goes to the water to wash, and that's really kind of his moment, I guess, to quote unquote be himself, right? Where he's sort of not playing this role. Except for that moment, he's very dirty. He's like a shaggy dog. And it is fascinating when you do get to the end of the movie and it talks about deliver us from the power of the dog. And the question is like, we've been made to think one character is that, but is that character really that? And what does that mean? And I love that complicated nature. And I mentioned before, I really love Phil's character and Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, because I really feel like that is layered. That's where the movie has its heart. And perhaps with just some of those thin storytelling elements, if some of those were changed, I probably like this film better. But I do. I think it's it's a fine film, and it was definitely enjoyable to watch.
Wade, you said something earlier I wanted to go back to, and just going back to Peter's character, I found this really interesting. You talked about him in the sort of the creation of evil, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that in relation to his character, because even on the second watch, it's the second watch that I started to even piece together that he was psychotic. Other than him killing the bunny, I knew that there were issues, but I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think maybe that's part of the weakness of the film, because the movie gives us kind of a hint where he's like, I'll do anything to protect my mom at the beginning. And he does kill and dissect animals. And it's not even that Phil is evil and he kills him, but there's a strange dynamic between Peter and his mom. There's that Hitchcockian psycho type of relationship where he's very protective of her. And I think the film doesn't necessarily come out and say it, but I think by the end you say, okay, like he said his dad was drinking. His dad committed suicide. He found the body. Well, it kind of felt like the movie was saying, like at the end, the light bulb's supposed to come on, and you're like, oh, he killed his dad too. And then he looks over at Jesse Plemons' character. And so I think that kind of takes away from some of the complicated nature of the movie, where it's not like, okay, the evil of Phil has kind of rubbed off on him and kind of changed him. Instead, he's like, he killed when he was younger. He killed his dad, and then he killed animals. So it takes maybe what could be a little more complicated, and it feels a little more one-dimensional. And so that is where the question of evil is like, well, where did that kind of evil come from, and where was that born? And Phil, it's partly is him sort of shredding this image, and maybe it's abuse, but we don't really get that with Peter. It just seems to be something inside of him, and it makes, like I said, it makes for kind of this pulpy storyline, but I'd like to see a little bit more there.
I guess I just didn't get the pulpy vibe from it. I think a pulpy story would sort of, in my mind, would sort of be the big deal would be like, oh, the big reveal is that Peter is a killer, and that's sort of like the big thing that the movie is about, in the same way that the big reveal of Psycho is that Mother was dead all along and it was just Norman doing all the killing. Like that's sort of what makes that the pulpy story. I think this one, there is kind of that twist, but the focus is less on kind of goosing the audience with the big reveal, and more about maybe making us confront what we had assumed about these characters from the beginning. And now that we see that things aren't what we assumed, what do we do with our earlier reactions to these characters? Like if we're sort of like, oh, Phil's the bad guy, I don't like Phil, I really want Peter to give him his just desserts, and then at the end of the film we realize, well, Phil wasn't the the gargoyle that I thought he was, and Peter's kind of scary. What do I do with those assumptions earlier? I think forcing the audience to come to terms with that is partly what I think makes this film so interesting to me personally, is that it doesn't just leave those elements out there. It forces you to confront what you do with them as a viewer.
Yeah. And I think it does. I think the ending is just so strong, right? And talking to people who've watched it, it's like, wait, what happened? And then he's just kind of staring out the window. It does feel like it ends not on a moment of introspection, but on kind of like this big twist to where it's like, oh, wait, I need to rewind, you know? And it's funny because I talked to a couple people who are like, I had to rewind and be, oh, that's what happened. And so the twist and his character just being this killer kind of engulfs the end of it, in my perspective. But I agree, like the movie is more than that. I think it wants to be more than that. We're thinking about roles. We're thinking about who these individuals are and masculinity, and how is Peter exhibiting sort of toxic masculinity, and like how is he not? And so the film does delve into some of those topics.
You know, so much of the film I see is about being self-aware, is about talking about not the film is self-aware, but I'm saying that the characters are about discovering their self-awareness. You know, by the end, like, you know, in some ways, Jesse Plemons' character, I cannot think of his name, but Phil's brother, George. To me, he's actually one of the more repugnant characters in the film. It drives me nuts. Kevin's eyes got real wide there when
I mean, there are a fair few repugnant characters in this film. So I'm just surprised that George was the top of your list.
George just really bothers me because I think the thing about George that really bothers me is not just that he wants to climb the social ladder or take a different route to social status. You know, it's he's trying to drag everybody with him, you know, with his wife, what is Kirsten Dunst's character's name?
Rose.
Which, side note, a little bit funny that Kirsten Dunst kept saying Peter all the way through it. She's still my Mary Jane, but anyway, back to Spider-Man. But you know, Rose, you can play the piano. Well, no, I really can't. Yes, you can, and you're very good at it. And oh no, my wife is great. No, I really don't want to do that. Yes, you can, and you're going to be amazing. And he's. It's not about, like, he's trying to take everybody with him. You know, he goes to Phil and he says, I would really appreciate it if you'd wash up. You know, like you talk about that conversation, but that's what drives me nuts about George, is that it's not just about him. It's about trying to make the whole world see him in a certain set of light, or a certain light, at least with Phil or with Peter or with Rose. They're sort of involved in their own struggles on their own, but George's problems are so much bigger than that. Now, I'm not saying that's better. I'm not saying that's worse than, you know, being a psychotic serial killer, but I'm just saying that his character he just drove me crazy for that reason. And I loved the line, you know, at the end of the film, when Phil is confronting George about his wife's alcoholism, and he just says, you know, it's high time that you and Bozo, you got close to a few, what you call them, facts. And the way he spews out this word facts, it's like this is why I talk about Cumberbatch's, you know, I feel like he wanted to be known, because it's almost like he's saying, I wish the truth could be a thing. I wish the truth could be a thing, but in this world, nobody wants it. Everybody wants to live their own lie, or are afraid to get it out there because of these expectations you can go to from toxic masculinity and whatnot. And that's what I just think it's so heart-wrenching when you look at Phil, but when you look at George, it ticks me off.
Well, and this is part of what I mean by when I say that it's got a literary sensibility, is that just this conversation is drawing out so much of an individualized response to these characters and just drawing out these different layers that struck different viewers different ways. Like, I think the interesting thing about George is that in a different movie, or at least if you just took the first half of this movie where, you know, he meets Rose at her country inn, they fall in love. He's the only one who shows respect to her out of that entire group. You're kind of primed like George is like, he's kind of the knight in shining armor. He's chivalrous. He genuinely seems to love her. He genuinely seems to want to give her a good life. And then as the film goes on, you kind of see these other notes creep into his character. Like, yes, he loves her and he dotes on her, but that also manifests as him pushing her to do things that she doesn't want to do. Yes, he loves his brother and wants the best for his brother, but that manifests as being a little bit controlling and kind of shaming him for being the way he is. And that all those elements of George make him not like a bad person per se. Like, he's not a villain, but he's flawed. And he's got some shadows in his soul, just like all the other characters. And I think that's what makes this cast of characters so compelling to me, is that they all have those little dark corners in their inside where they don't shine as much light as they maybe should.
I would
everyone has said Thomasin McKenzie's character. I was kind of thrown off.
I was so happy that Thomasin McKenzie showed up in this movie. That made me very
but it was distracting because I was like, wait, is she supposed to be something? And she's not. So but I do wonder, maybe the part was bigger and it got cut. That would be maybe what I think could have happened.
Well, you do know the original title of the film was First Night in Soho.
First Night in Soho. That's great.
It was a prequel. It took place before. Yeah, no, she was. I was like, where do I know her from? Oh my gosh, I didn't even recognize her. I recognize the voice. Yeah. The voice is, but she's so far in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I see these conversations about the film, and even this one here is sort of moving the needle for me a little bit. I like it, and it is gorgeous. Like, the film is gorgeous from across the board. It is, when was the last time Campion made a film? What was her last film? It's been over 10 years.
Bright Star? I know that she made Top of the Lake, like a TV series in the past decade, but I can't think of a feature film that she's made since Bright Star off the top of my head.
I'm looking it up. Hold on. Yeah, the last one, according to this, the last one she did was Bright Star in 2009.
Yep.
So, wow. I mean, that's a long stretch. I mean, for someone with her. Now, again, yes, like you said, she did television there.
Mm-hmm. But, and I will say this: as much as streaming services have changed movies, and as much as I like seeing movies in theaters, it does give me hope that they're giving money to filmmakers to do projects like this. Martin Scorsese's, he's doing was it Killers of the Flower Moon, and we've got this film. Movies that might not get made today are being made. And so it was nice to see this Netflix give this one the green light, because there's a lot of like not good stuff on Netflix. But it was good to see this.
I feel like the relatively slow pace at which Campion releases new movies has the nice effect of reminding us, when a new Campion movie comes out, just what a treasure she is as a director. Just you go a long time without seeing some a movie for grown-ups that really is naughty and complex and can inspire great conversations like these. And then one comes out and you're just like, oh, that's what that's like. That's so nice. Yeah. God bless Jane Campion.
This and Titan are a great double bill. And
yep.
Well, guys, this has been fun, but we should screen it or skip it. The Power of the Dog. Screen it or skip it.
I mean, I'm all aboard the screen it train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you should screen it too. I think it's worthwhile, and the fact too, now it's on Netflix. Like it's very accessible right now. You should definitely check it out.
That's interesting. I honestly thought you were going to go the other way on that one.
No. I feel like because so many people love this movie. It's like, oh, okay. I got to talk about why I was kind of indifferent and stuff, but it's great to see a filmmaker like this work. It's great to see the cinematography. It's great to see some of these performances, even if not everything worked for me.
Yeah, I would say that I would say that this conversation has pushed my needle, further in the appreciation window than it was when we started. I think, Kevin, I think you're right. Like the conversation the film like this can spark gives me a little more connection to it, more interest. It will be a screen it for me. I did see it in the theater. It is a beautiful film to see in the theater. Absolutely stunning. It wouldn't be my strongest recommendation. It is a gorgeous film. There is the scene when they're standing at one of the mountains is one of my movie moments of the year. I thought the movie moment, thought it was great. There were some things I didn't connect with or as much. It wasn't my favorite film of the year, but I do think it's really stunningly made with some incredible performances. So yeah, especially again, since it's on Netflix, the accessibility is easy. And I think that makes it easier to recommend in some ways for me. So
yeah, I mean, like, what else are you gonna do? You got 2 hours. You got 2 hours on the couch at night. Just watch Power of the Dog. What's stopping you?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, you can watch that or The Floor is Lava. So I actually like The Floor is Lava though. Maybe
I'll tell you what's stopping them. It's because they're going to take that 2 hours and listen to this podcast. They're going to pop YouTube. They're going to make sure that they take in our 2021 moments and our conversation about it. That's what they're going to do with their Friday night.
There it is. Or they'll listen to us on fast mode 1.5. Cut it down to 2 hours, or no, an hour and a half.
What did you think was your number 3 moment? Well, let me tell you about my number 3 moment. Speed it up with a higher pitch. Be great. Guys, this has been phenomenal. How can our viewers catch up with you?
Well, so Seeing and Believing is still going. We have a brand new sparkly co-host named Sarah Welch Larson. She actually just officially came on board. I think probably 2 weeks ago, as of the air date of this episode. But we just did our top 10 episodes of the year, we just did our top 10 films of the year episode back.
These are our favorite episodes. This is it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can find us at See Believe POD on Twitter. And of course you can find me on my personal account on Twitter at McLenithan.
Yeah, definitely check out Seeing and Believing.
Wade, we miss you. Porn
I'm
went
still
out
in the
for
background. Wade. I'm still on. Y'all didn't know I'm muted the whole time.
Oh, so you're that shadowy presence in the Skype window.
In the Skype, it has no avatar. It's just the gray. No, I miss talking to Kevin every week. So this has been great. Best way is probably connect wadebearden.com. Where I'll post some of my work, and about to release my second book, To My Friend Who Left the Faith, a letter from a prodigal to a prodigal. So that's coming out in the next couple of months. So yeah, you can connect with me there. Sometimes I'm on Twitter at Wade Hance, but not a lot. I've kind of got tired of Twitter, so I'm not on there too much. But every once in a while I pop in.
But Twitter is such a bucket of sunshine. Why would that?
Yeah, right.
It's a bucket of something.
It's something, all right.
Honestly, to you both, this has been so great. Just having you both together has been so much fun. I really appreciate you both coming on, and certainly love chatting with you about anything. but this has been a special episode as well. So thanks so much to you both.
Yeah, it was really great coming on.
Thanks, Steve.
I appreciate it. To you at home, a reminder, you can find us wherever podcasts are available. And you can find us on YouTube. You can like and subscribe to us there, both there and online. We have lots of interviews, as well as the Screenfish Radio podcast. We also have lots of interviews with industry professionals, and that you may interest you as well. If you go to the podcast page at screenfish.net, you can download Fishing for More, which are some small group questions that you can have to get you started the conversation about the film where you are. But again, so gentlemen, I thank you so much for coming on, and for you at home, we started the conversation. This was Screenfish.